Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Better Business Writing Workshop, How to Future-Proof Your Career with a Writing Practice. I'm Micah McGuire, ProWritingAid's Growth Marketing Manager, and today I am joined by our product strategist and resident expert, AJ Ogilvie. AJ is an assistant professor of business communications at USC Marshall School of Business, so you know he has got a very actionable workshop planned for you guys today. First, he's going to discuss a little bit about how we can shift our mindsets around writing, because we all learned some false truths, especially while we were in school, about writing. So we've got to start with a little bit of myth busting. Then he's going to talk you through all the different ways that you can actually start developing and building your writing practice. And finally, he's going to go back and tie all this into how you can use these techniques to boost your career. If at any time during the session you have questions, please feel free to pop those into the Q&A box. AJ is going to be pausing it several times during the workshop to take questions, and we're going to have a little bit of time at the end of the session just to catch up on if you happen to think of a question that may be related to part one, maybe during part two or part three, we'll have time to answer those questions as well, so we're not backtracking too much. So don't worry if you have a revelation during part two that you had a question on part one and want to go ahead and discuss that, just throw that in the Q&A box, and we will be discussing that at the end of the session. I do ask guys, try to keep them to the Q&A box, because just depending on how chatty everybody is in the chat, we can sometimes lose questions if they're submitted via the chat box. But if they're in the Q&A, we can make sure that we have all of them and get them all answered. All righty. Well, AJ, I think that is my housekeeping handled. So, ready to take it away?
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Micah. I appreciate it. So I want to start by just talking a little bit about what this session will be like. And I want to see if I'm accurate about this. So we're sort of in this complex place in the pandemic. And I imagine a lot of you, maybe signed up for this because you just, you want a little break in your work day, or you want to check out something new. But I want to just throw out a hypothesis about writing, and I want you all. So today's session, it's going to be a fast and interactive and productive, 30 to 40 minutes. I want this to feel very collaborative. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and teaching, and why this workshop is so similar to my teaching, which is really interactive. And I want you to build something today. So I want to start off, I would like you to answer some things in the chat just to get things moving. So I have a hypothesis for all of you. And there are three ways to respond to my question. So I'm going to pose a hypothesis, and I'd like you to answer yes, no, or kinda. So you can put, you can write yes, or you can write no, or you can write kinda, or you can put Y or N or kinda. So are we ready? I have a hypothesis that I have about you all and why you joined this. So here's my hypothesis. You all love writing. You find it very difficult, and you want to be better at it. Can you let me know yes, no, or kinda? Is my hypothesis for why you're joining today correct? Okay, cool. So we've got one kinda. Okay, nice, great.
Seeing some yeses?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, love it. Couple of kindas.
Yeah, I know. And if you're up for it, if you put kinda, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit of what I got wrong. This just helps me understand kind of where all you are coming from a little bit too. And there's also, I'm a coffee freak, and I think I see someone here might work at Pete's Coffee. And if you are at Pete's Coffee, that sounds amazing. And okay, cool. So Jennifer's saying, I love it, and I don't find it too difficult. This is great. This is great. Okay, cool. Let's see what else.
I love this response about, I don't know if I necessarily like writing, but I feel like I can be a creative writer. That's excellent point, because I mean, so many of us do have stories. That's
right. Okay, great. So let me, it's hard, right? For a lot of us, it's really hard. For some of us, it's not hard. And the reason I brought up Pete's Coffee is it's easier for me to write when I drink lots of coffee. I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's it's definitely a performance enhancing, substance. But so yeah, sometimes it's hard putting thoughts on paper. Exactly. And today, my hope in the next 30 minutes is I really want you to think differently about writing. And I'm hoping that today in our session, you begin to actually act differently about writing and to develop a writing process today. So I'm going to ask you all to do some writing. So if any of you love writing with a pen and paper, maybe take a second and grab that. But if some of you prefer to write on your laptops, that's totally cool. But you will leave today with something, with some momentum. So let me just talk about myself a little bit. I grew up obsessed with advertising and persuasion. I grew up with Michael Jordan, Nike commercials, and I was always blown away by how do they make me feel this way? How are they so persuasive? How is Nike so persuasive? And as an undergrad, I studied communication because I was super interested in, I wanted to make those persuasive, powerful Nike ads that I saw as a kid. So I had an internship in advertising, and I ended up working in strategic communications for a consulting firm in Washington, D.C. And then I had careers as a marketing director for solar energy company, for an architecture firm, and in real estate. But at a certain point, okay, great, we've got some people who are connecting with the persuasion part. At a certain point in my corporate career, I just wasn't finding it meaningful. And we're going to talk a little bit. I wasn't finding sort of my why. And I left the corporate world and I did a master's in literature. My goal was, I love talking about books. I love words. I'm going to teach high school English. So I started teaching, started doing a master's in literature. I started teaching the classic college writing in the United States. It's the classic college writing course. And I also taught literature courses, and I absolutely loved it. And then I did a Ph.D. at UC Santa Barbara in education, but my particular emphasis was language literacy and composition. So in normal terms, what that means is, as a Ph.D. student, I studied two things. I studied how do people develop as writers, not creative writers, but just sort of organizational, professional writing. How do people develop as writers? And then the second thing I studied was how do we create curriculum to support that development? And so for the past 6 years, I've been teaching at USC as an assistant professor of business communication. I teach a class called Advanced Writing for Business. I also teach consulting classes and problem solving classes. But overall, just if you're wondering who I am and why I'm talking to you today, the big idea of me is I'm really interested in language, how humans use language, and how humans learn to use language more powerfully and for their own purposes. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to jump in. But also, one of the things that I really love is feel free, if you have any comments, as Micah said, put them in the Q&A and I'll stop and actually address them. Also, feel free in the chat to agree, disagree. I really love the idea of the chat being a sort of narration of everyone's experience. So please feel free to continue to write in the chat. So I'm going to share my screen and we will jump in. Okay. All right, so the way I really wanted to start today was, we do have a discussion about writing and future-proofing your career, but I wanted to be more persuasive. I wanted to come out of the gate trying to be a little more powerful. So I really believe this. So why writing will change your life, and how writing can change your life. So that's what we're going to get at today. So here we go. There are 3 parts to today. The first is I'm going to redefine and ideally reframe writing for you, get you thinking differently about writing. And then I want to talk about how we can write for ourselves. I don't think we think a lot about writing for ourselves and what would that mean and what that could enable. And then I want to talk about how we can write with and for others. And ideally, these 3 parts, when they come together, I hope it'll be kind of a powerful new conceptualization for you to think about writing. So let's jump in. So why everything you've been taught about writing is wrong. I just want to talk about this real quick. Why everything you've been taught about writing is wrong. Now, this is obviously a little bit sarcastic, and I'm doing this to be a little bit provocative because clearly not everything that you've been taught about writing is wrong. But at least if you grew up in the United States and you did the kind of conventional K-12 education, I can kind of speak to this a little bit, but I could also speak a little bit to global people's, global. We have someone from Kenya, and I'm not familiar with Kenya's education system, but I have a general sense of how writing is taught around the world. So here we go. One thing is that writing is a technology. It's an invention. We often conflate writing and speaking. Oh yeah, writing's easy. Writing and speaking, but you as a human, you do not need to be taught to speak. This is a biological evolutionary function. You will speak, you will learn to speak without having to be taught. Writing is different, but we often think they're the same. And so writing is an actual invention. It's a total technology. And in terms of humans, it's a relatively recent invention. So I would almost argue that we're still figuring out how writing works for us as humans. We're still fine-tuning the technology. And the basic premise of this idea that writing is a technology is that I just want you to really think about, just to be open to the idea that writing is very difficult. Writing is very hard. Because it's so cognitively demanding. There's so much cognitive load that we have to carry when we write. Number two, I think we learn to write in what I would call unhelpful ways. So let's talk about a little bit about K-12 education in the United States. In the United States, the only place where we really write, the only place where we really get feedback on our writing is when we're in our English classes, where we're writing about fiction. And, I always joke with my students that you often were asked to write about, let's say, like The Great Gatsby, and you were told to find the symbolism. But let's pause for a second. One, why are we only writing in our English classes? Why aren't we writing in history? Why aren't we writing in biology? I mean, we are, but there's not a lot of focus on that. So one of the things that can happen as a result of us just writing in our English classes is this. What if we don't like fiction, which is totally reasonable? What if we don't like writing about The Great Gatsby or, Holden Caulfield, A Catcher in the Rye? What if we don't like writing about these things? We might not write very well. And what happens when we don't write well in a school context is that we get feedback, and sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not, but sometimes it can make us feel like we're bad writers. But it's only because we're being evaluated on that one particular kind of writing. And what I want to show you is that there's so many different other kinds of writing. The other thing that I want to talk about when we learn to write in unhelpful ways is often many of us take timed writing tests. And these timed writing tests are totally problematic. And I won't go on too much, but let me just give you an example. I want to throw this out to everyone. I want you to imagine your boss saying, Micah, we'll use you as an example. Your boss, Micah, says, tomorrow at noon, I'm going to have you write for 1 hour. And I'm going to evaluate on that writing. And Micah might say, okay, well, I just have some questions. What am I going to be writing about? And Micah's boss says, I can't tell you. Okay, Micah says, that's okay. Then Micah will say, well, who am I writing to? And the boss, I can't tell you who that is. I can't tell you who the audience is. Okay, well, that's gonna be tough. Okay, Micah then might say, well, how am I being evaluated? I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that either. So then Micah says, I mean, this is ridiculous. No one would consent to doing this kind of writing. But this, in the United States, is a primary way that we evaluate young people as writers. But more importantly, and more problematically, is that this is a primary way that most of us learn to understand our abilities as writers. Oh, I got a 5 on that timed writing test. I got a 2 on it. And the truth is, these are completely inauthentic writing situations. So for any of you, I know some of you might be like, AJ, when are we going to start to talk about business writing or career writing? One of the things, though, is like what I'm really trying to do is unravel a lot of these ways that we think about writing before we can introduce new ways of thinking about writing.
And AJ, I think you make a great point here, because so often in business, we're writing to communicate, right? We know who our audience is. We know what we're trying to get across. So if we've only ever been taught this kind of rigid, structured essay writing, essentially, I think it's natural that once a lot of us get out into the business world, it's kind of almost a writing culture shock, I'd say.
It's so interesting that you say that, Micah. I say this to my undergrads all the time. What I think, and this can happen in undergrad as well, in the United States, I know this for certain, is that you get very little substantive feedback on your writing in college. And what happens is you're writing to perform. You're writing to tell your teacher, I did the assignment. And so the classic example that I always give is your culture shock, Michael. Here's a quick example. You start a new job and your boss says, hey, I can't make this meeting. Can you make that meeting for me? Take some notes and then share them, share with me what happened in the meeting. You're like, oh, I'm so excited. I'm ready to prove that I'm so smart. I'm taking all these notes. You finish the meeting. You go to write. You write 4 pages of notes for your boss. Your boss, she writes back and says, AJ, I need this in 1 paragraph. And you go, oh my gosh, I don't know how to synthesize all of this. And partly what's happening is you got used to just kind of saying everything that you know and not really thinking about your audience. And so this is super key. Yeah,
perfect example, AJ.
Yeah, writing culture shock is so true. And so I think what happens is we often have a deficit model of writing. Like I know, this is why I was asking a lot of you that just wanted to see what some of you were saying, like, yes, I do find writing difficult, or I don't find it writing difficult. But what if writing could be something amazing? What if writing could be something enabling? What if writing could be something that kind of transforms us? What if writing is something that we can get excited about? This is what I'm hoping. And, for any of you who feel like I'm laying it on too thick, the reason why I'm saying this is because this is just what I see. I've seen for the past 10 years with my undergraduates, many of whom feel very vulnerable about writing, many of whom feel that they're not good writers. And so I really think developing as a writer in really positive ways begins with seeing writing in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and this also,
please, Micah, jump in.
This also just goes back to, a lot of times I think we're all expected at a certain point to just quote unquote know how to write really well. And it's just, if you're an undergraduate, what's your major? I mean, because oftentimes, unless you're in a very writing heavy major, such as law, political history, English, one of those majors, your core English classes could be some of the last writing you do. I was actually in biology myself, and I think I may have written maybe 1 or 2 essays and a research thesis over the course of my last, junior, senior year in undergraduate.
That's exactly right. And I think the other point that you bring up that's really good is, I don't want to write about something I'm not interested in. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do it well. And I think what happens is we're forced to write in these different spaces, and that, at work, you're not always going to be able to choose what you write about, of course. So we got to be somewhat flexible and learn how to write well, even if we're not writing about something we're knowledgeable about. But at the end of the day, I think we can kind of set ourselves up to try to write in ways that or write in domains or spaces that we're knowledgeable in, that we're confident in. So it is really interesting. Okay, I just wanted to see if anybody had any comments on the chat. It's a little bit hard to see when I'm sharing. So all right, I'm talking for a lot, and I'm about to have all of you I'll have all of you write very soon. Okay, so we're thinking differently about writing. We're trying to see it as something that can be enabling, something that can kind of make us, all right. Oop, that's not what I wanted. I apologize. Play from current slide. Okay. So I want to pause really quickly right now, and I'm not going to take 3 minutes, but I want all of you to just take a little bit of time, just take 2 minutes, and just jot down some of your ideas. And one way you can kind of maybe get your ideas moving is, and I'd love for you to share in the chat as much as you'd like. Sorry, one moment. apologize. I went to the wrong presentation. Okay. Yeah. So what I want to do now is, what is your definition of writing? And do you, and what I'd like you to answer is, does your definition correspond with anything that I'm saying at all? Like, is what I'm saying at all somewhat speaking to your experience of writing? So I just wanted to take, let me see, it's 11:23 for me on Pacific time. Just take 2 minutes and just say yes or no. Take 2 minutes just to write a little bit about whether or not this sort of is corresponding to your definition of writing. And then when you're done, just share, share in the chat. So again, like, what's your take? What do you think your existing definition of writing is? And I think it's helpful to write just a little bit, just to get your ideas moving. So what I'm saying doesn't just kind of float by you, but ideally gets into your brain a little bit. So just take 2 minutes. What do you think your current definition of writing is? And does my, cool. I like this one. A way to communicate with others and get others thinking, to strike a chord. Yeah. Shelly says story sharing. Yeah. We're going to talk about storytelling. That's cool. Thinking in motion. I love it. If you were to if you had to come up with your own definition of writing, what would that be? Yeah, Micah, this is cool. One of your ideas around organizing your thoughts is sort of sense making. So, like, really, we don't know. There's a great line, I think, by Voltaire, is we don't know what we think. And he says, I don't know what I've thought until I've written. So, all right, let's keep going. All right, so let's talk about writing in our careers. And I really believe this. I really think writing can integrate the personal and the professional. So there is a ton of literature out there about personal branding and about our reputation and about building expertise. And I think all of that literature is really thoughtful and really interesting. But I think my own take on our careers and what we're really trying to do, because I don't think most of us are saying, oh, I want to build a personal brand. Maybe you are. But what I really think deep down, what we're all trying to do is really integrate the personal and the professional. And what I mean by that is, and there's a lot of literature out there about this now, and I was talking to an exec at Airbnb recently who came to my class, and all he would talk about is the culture of Airbnb and this idea that they want people to bring their authentic selves. And so the way I think about this, about integrating the personal and the professional and how we define career success, is I really think it's defined around this idea of authenticity. And this notion of authenticity is really complex, but it's basically this idea that when we're able to really figure out who we are, and then we're able to spend 40 hours a week in a way at a job or at an occupation that enables us to be fully ourselves, if not more, that this is ultimately the goal, and that success would be a byproduct of this. The goal is not to be successful so much, right? But the goal is to first be authentic and to figure out who we are, how we might work in ways that are authentic. And then I think, this is my own view, just in teaching lots of communication classes and then also teaching classes around careers, that success becomes a byproduct of that authenticity. So I want to talk about how writing can help us figure out this notion of authenticity. So here we go. writing really is a way of collecting data on ourselves, because it's very hard. If someone were to ask you, who are you, or, what do you care about? It's very hard to just on the spot start saying something or having an answer to that. So writing is an instrument for collecting data on ourselves. And one way we can collect data on ourselves is the obvious ways, is journaling, is brainstorming. And what I believe is so important is called writing to know. So one of the things that happens, I think, as a result of how we were taught to write, is you're not supposed to write until you know what you think. The classic thing in undergrad or even in high school would be you have to come up with your thesis first. And this is totally problematic because, if you're writing a paper and you have to come up with the thesis first, you're very likely going to come up with something that's kind of half-baked, that's not really well thought out. And so what I want to introduce to all of you, I want you to introduce you to this idea of like writing to know, and that I'm allowed to write before I even know what I'm talking about, before I even know what I'm thinking. A metaphor that I think about is like, I often think we're afraid to put pen to paper because there's something about seeing those words and we judge them, And the way I think about it is sort of this, like when we're at our house, we're not dressed up for other people, right? Like when we're at our house, we're wearing like comfortable clothes, and maybe the pandemic's changed this, right? Like people are always in comfortable clothes. But what I'm getting at is like, when you're allowed to write, I want to give you all the permission to write in a way that's cozy, that's your lounge, that's your sweatpants, and that you're allowed to write and not judge it, and just not write and think, what would other people think about this? So it's writing to know. Yeah. Micah, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, AJ, it's just really funny. I'm drawing some parallels to creative writers. I know we have got a couple of creative writing folks in the audience, and I can't help but be reminded of, I believe it was Sir Terry Pratchett who said the first draft is just you telling yourself the story.
Yeah.
And I feel like creative writers, we kind of, sit there and go, okay, even creative writers suffer from this I can't put it on the page till it's perfect syndrome.
That's it. And like what that's it. And it's like what I'm almost trying to think about too is move it into this space of like writing as a way of thinking, writing as a way of going somewhere new in a particular domain. I always joke with students that 5 years out from undergrad, no one is having a conversation that goes like this. Oh, I'll never forget this multiple choice Scantron test I took. Oh, I remember so vividly the knowledge and insights. No one remembers Scantron tests. But I wrote a paper 22 years ago about the United States and our complex history. And I can vividly remember the thesis. And the reason I bring up this as an example is that something changes in our brains of what we know and what we're thinking. Something changes when we write. So for your career, what I'm trying to say to all of you is be open to the idea that you can write your way into knowing rather than I need to wait until I know. So whether it's a question, whether it's a project you're working on, just write about it for a little bit. And don't share it with anyone. Remember, like these are your sweatpants. This is your version of sweatpants. So we're going to do a little bit right now. I want all of you to do the following. On one hand, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Simon Sinek. He's a famous speaker, thinker, and he has a famous, arguably probably one of the most watched YouTube videos, a TED Talk about begin with why. So I'm running out of time a little bit, but I think this is really important, is I want all of you to take 3 minutes, super fast. I know it's not long enough. I want you to take 3 minutes and I want you to just write sweatpants style. Don't worry about grammar. You can do little drawings. You can do bullet points. You can do a little brainstorm. I just want you to give up old ideas of writing. I don't want you to think anyone's going to see this. And I want you to think about your why. And what do I mean by your why? What drives your energy? What gives you energy? What gets you fired up? Come up with as many ideas as possible. But what do you think can get you up in the morning and get you moving and get you excited? So just two minutes, I'd like you to brainstorm. 2 minutes, just write, just again, scribble. Like, it's even okay to write, I don't know what I want to say. I don't know what I want to say. And just go into you'll find your, but what I want to have happen is that you actually, after 2 minutes, you're like, oh, I'm thinking a tiny bit differently. I've never had to actually pause and write about this. So go for it. Write about your why for 2 minutes. One more minute. Okay, so hopefully you have some cool ideas. Caraballo, 1888, had some really neat themes in their why around like storytelling and expression, and I think a lot of us probably have that as a why. Is like, I just want to get out who I am for other people. So let me keep going. And okay. Okay. Micah, can I just get a quick I just want to make sure can everyone see, let's write and discuss what is your why?
Looks good from here.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. So the other thing that I want you to think about, and we're not going to do it today because we don't have enough time, but I want you to think about your why, but then I also want you to, and I'm going to give you homework, I want you to think about your USP. If you're familiar with Dory Clark, she's one of the most popular LinkedIn course instructors, and she has a lot of great work, and she talks on reputation and building your career and success, and she talks a lot about USP, and I think this is one of the kind of challenging parts of our careers. But what I want you to do is, you've written about your why for a little bit, but another question that you should writing to know, is write your way into your unique sales proposition. And I really believe that every single one of us has something unique about us, right? And like so there's two ways of thinking about this. Is I want you to write your way into knowing, for you personally, what do you think you've got just kind of a natural advantage? Like what comes to you naturally that you think could be a unique sales point, something that differentiates you from other people. And then another way to think about this is like, you might have kind of a half-developed uniqueness that you might want to explore even more. So just for me personally, my wife can attest to this, is like my unique sales proposition to a certain degree is I just love talking to people, all kinds of people. I cannot stop talking to people, especially people I don't know. I like talking to strangers. I know it's very, very weird, right? But you know what? This is a unique advantage, is in teaching. Every semester, I get roughly 100 to 200 completely new people, completely, totally unique people. I do not know them. They're from around the world with incredible experiences. And guess what? I get to talk to them. This is something that part of my unique sales proposition. So anyways, some of you, the reason I'm saying writing about it is that if I just say, think about your unique sales proposition. Just think about it. It's not as helpful as actually writing about it. So write your way into your unique sales proposition. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. So one of the things I've hopefully introduced you all to is this idea, like, you're allowed to just write for yourself. Like, you're allowed to wear sweatpants at your house. No one sees you. You're allowed to write for yourself. You're allowed to write your way into knowing, and no one's going to grade it. No one's going to say, oh, you didn't cite this correctly. This is APA, this is MLA. Like, no, there's a big and important space for writing where we just do it for ourselves. And this is how we learn more about what we're thinking, learn more about our knowledge, learn more about ourselves. So we write for ourselves. We must have a space in our lives for writing for ourselves, but we must also have a space for writing with and for others. So let's talk about this. How can we develop a writing practice? And what I mean by practice is something that we do daily. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with a lot of the literature on habits. And Micah, I'm sure you're familiar too with the book, Atomic Habits. And there's a lot of literature out there about, and sometimes I can feel overwhelmed by all of the literature out there. So today, all I wanted to do was give you one small, practical, applicable tip, right? I'm not going to tell you 50 ways to develop a writing practice. I'm just going to give you one, and we're going to do it a little bit today. All right, it's 11:39. I don't have a ton of time, but here's the thing. I want to give you small, manageable, daily things that are actually accomplishable. So a writing practice to me is you bringing writing into your life in a daily way that's meaningful. That's it. I'm not going to tell you need to find 3 hours every week to write quietly. I think this is very difficult. I want to give you one small goal that you can do every day. Because here's the thing. We need to find ways to write. You are not going to develop a writing practice. You're not going to develop a daily writing practice. You're not going to develop this ways of this new mode of writing in your life. If it's not this, it must be authentic. It must be, you can't, no one's going to go, oh, I need to go write, but I don't know what I'm going to write about. So it needs to be authentic. It needs to be purpose-driven, number two. There needs to be, in a way, when you're starting your writing practice, it needs to have some kind of goal, right? It needs to have a purpose. But also the other thing is you need to be accountable a little bit. You need to be able to get feedback on this from other people. So some of you might be wondering, well, AJ, what am I going to write about? How am I going to start my daily practice? So we need a kind of what we call genre. We need a kind of text to start with. So what better way to begin your writing practice is with your story. And what do I mean by that? I'm going to give the kind of the worst situation where we think about our story. The classic, tell me about yourself question. Can I get a little chat action from everybody? I have a hypothesis. Very few of us, when someone asks us in an interview, in a networking situation, wherever it is, when anyone asks us, tell me about yourself, here's my hypothesis. We are not excited about answering this question. Yes, no, is this true? Can you all tell me in the chat? I do. My hypothesis is that none of us like to answer this question. Yes or true or false, T or F. Will you put that in the chat? True or false? None of us like to answer this question. This is, let me look in the chat a little bit. True, right? Depends on who's asking why. Great point, Sarah. Yeah, totally. None of us like this question. None of us like it. But what if we did? What if we got excited? What if we thought, I can't wait for them to ask me the tell me about yourself question? And I think writing can get us to that point where we go, I'm excited about this. So for those of you who are wondering, well, AJ, why did you pick this one? I just feel, in my own experience teaching MBAs and undergrads, I think this is arguably one of the most difficult questions of our lives. So let's start our writing practice working on one of the most difficult questions of our life, one that most of us are not that excited about. And so, yeah, it's kind of, right? Okay. So here we go. I want you to go back to your why. I want to go back to you to go back to your brainstorming, go back to your what you wrote. And yeah, so sorry, I'm looking in the chat. No one likes talking about themselves. I even know even more if you're from arguably the United States is what we would sort of roughly generalize, categorize as an individualist society, where we're much more comfortable talking about ourselves, our accomplishments. And if you're from a culture that's more collectivist, I know that that's even more difficult for people from collectivist cultures, and I totally get that. But what I want to get you at is, I'm reading the chat, so yeah. Well, for certain, in an interview, the tell me about yourself is one of the most loaded questions. That is a very complex question, right? Because they don't really like want to know about you. You're not going to say, oh, I love margaritas and long walks on the beach. They're basically saying, how much did you prepare for this, and yeah, and how much did you prepare for this, and how much, like, I am going to judge you on how well you tell a story about who you are. Like, I am going to judge you on this story, and it'll tell me a lot about you, how much you think about yourself, how much you think about what you can do for us, or how much you think about your abilities. So it's super complex. Okay. So I wanted you all to leave today with some practical stuff. So you can go back to your why, your brainstorm, right? You can go back to your USP. And then the idea is you do not have to have a perfect answer to this. You will have, your goal is almost in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years to develop something that you really love. You are not going to nail it right away. But I want to give you 3 templates, right? 3 templates today that you can go with. So when someone says, tell me about yourself, and what I want you to do to see too is I want you to have kind of like a series of a story that you can adapt to different situations. So whether, the classic, it can be an elevator pitch. You're at a networking event, you're at a conference, you get on the elevator, you see this person's, their name tag says, oh my, it's someone you've really wanted to talk to. And then they're like, oh, well, tell me about you. And right? I want you to be prepared. I want you to be able to say, well, here's who I am. And you say it confidently. And in order to do that, you need to write it. You need to actually draft this. You need to write your way into knowing what that is, right? So one simple one, and again, you can riff off these, is kind of this template of I'm an X with Y looking to do Z, and this is really simple. So let me give you an example. This could be me. I'm a communications consultant with 10 years of experience looking to help organizations transform how they communicate. I don't love this. It's a little dry. I like it to have more color. It's a little black and white. But this will get me somewhere. And also it's like how I say this is as important as what I say. So for example, if I'm ready, if I'm on that elevator and I say, oh, Sarah, I'm really a huge fan of your work. I've always wanted to, kind of talk with you actually. Just, well, who are you? Tell me about yourself. If I'm able to say, I'm a communications consultant with 10 years of experience, again, I need to say it in a way that doesn't feel cheesy or canned, right? But this is something to run with. Okay, let me give you another template. This one's a little more creative, and I personally really like this. Because you kind of want to, like, one of the challenges is you also want to stand out from people, right? So if everybody uses the same template for their personal story, then it can start to feel canned, right? So I like this one. I'm driven by 2 questions. And now, if you're the CEO of this company that I want to work for, or if I'm in the interview, if I say I'm driven by 2 questions and I pause, the person is totally engaged. And they're like, this is different. And what the science of what we call stickiness, like what makes us sticky? Meaning, if I'm trying to get a job, how am I going to get sticky in the recruiter's head, in these people's head? A week after my interview, how do I make sure that person, when they go, what was AJ's deal? I want to be sticky in their mind. So this is a sticky, in my view, this is a kind of sticky story, but you could say I'm driven by 2 questions, X and Y. And you got to come up with 2 very cool questions. Also shows that you're kind of a thinker, you're curious, you're open-minded. You're not saying I'm driven by 2 beliefs that I know for certain. You're saying I'm driven by 2 questions. So it could be, AJ, I'm in an interview, right? AJ, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm really driven by two questions. How can we improve organizational communication? And two, how can organizational communication change companies' bottom line? Not just like interested in improving it, but change it so that companies make more money. This is a template too. And then let me give you template 3, and this is the example. You start with a struggle. You start with an industry and their struggle. Oh, sorry, here it is. So you could say, example, industry struggles with this. I'm someone, telling them who you are, who solves these problems using X. So this combines your USP a little bit, right? So here's mine. The consulting industry struggles to communicate persuasively. And I'm a communications consultant who helps consultants be more persuasive using empathy, clarity, and storytelling. Again, these are 3 templates. We can share these slides, but I want all of you, I think, remember writing to know, writing it without being afraid of anyone. I think all of you should give a shot at plugging your own work into these 3. How will you do that? How will you leave today? It's 11:49. Here's how. Micro progress. That's it. I think, there's a million productivity tips, but I think micro progress for me is, again, you can look it up, but I think this to me is probably the most important. And here's what I mean by micro progress. You just write for 5 minutes every day, just 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's it. And you are only focusing on your story. So you take the 3 templates that I've given you, or you take the question about your why, or you take the question about your USP, and you write for 5 minutes. Everyone has 5 minutes, right? And here's what I'm thinking. One, what might happen is if you write for 4 minutes and you get into it, you're going to write more than 5 minutes. 2, even if you just write for 5 minutes, what will happen is it's kind of a chain reaction. So you're going to write for those 5 minutes, and guess what? You're going to be thinking about that the rest of the day. So you'll be kind of writing it in your head, what you've come up with. And then at a certain point, whenever yeah, totally. Someone, S. Remy is talking about working on my USP, right? And what I want to say again is write your way into knowing what your USP is. You don't need to know what it is right now, but just start to write. I think I like this, or this gives me energy. This takes away my energy. You don't need to know it. You just write your way into knowing and be patient. And so I think too, at a certain point, maybe you say, I'm going to do 5 minutes of writing every day. And on Friday, I'm going to share my story, my 3 stories with the 3 versions of the templates with my colleague, my friend, whoever it is, and just say, hey, what do you think? Can I read these out to you? And 5 minutes. I even bet, even if you just did 5 minutes, which in a 5-day work week is only 25 minutes, I bet you will. I think you will be thinking much differently and more robustly, more thoughtfully about your story and your USP and your why. So I want to stop there. This is a small change that I think, again, I didn't want to come in here today and just say, you need to start a 4-hour writing practice. You need it, right? But like small things, working on authentic kinds of writing that are purpose-driven, that not only can help you with your career in terms of literally this is what you can say in the interview next week, but you start to learn about who you are and write your way into knowing who you are and what you care about. Yeah, S. Remy is talking about Match.com, and there's a lot. I think you're totally right. I mean, there's so much about relationships. It's not about, and this is work relationships or any kind of family or partner relationships. It's not about the other person, right? We know that it's about you knowing who you are. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'd love if anybody wants to chat about anything. And it could even be just observations. It does not have to be a question for me, because as if I'm some expert. This is not, it could be you just saying, hey, here's what I think about this. Or if you have any ideas about how we could make this conversation that we had today better, I'm interested in that too. And on that, I'm going to stop talking.
And guys, just remember, you can pop any questions in the Q&A. We can pop it into the chat, just whichever works best for you at the moment. Because again, like AJ said, we do want this to kind of be a conversation. So, all right, AJ, well, I think looks like you may have been so thorough, you've blown everyone's mind.
I just happens all the time. I just rarely, yeah.
And one of the things I do want to add to what AJ has said is remember that any writing you do is going to improve your other forms of writing. So we see this a lot with creative writers who also have to write at work, is if you've gone through and written, you know, I know a lot of us do National Novel Writing Month. So that's 50,000 words on a creative project in a month. A lot of the creative writers come out of the other end of that and go, you know what, I can't believe it, but I think it's also improved the other ways that I write, even when I'm writing at work, even when I'm writing emails. This has helped me just because it's going to light up those same areas of your brain over and over again. And the more different ways that you can find those pathways to connect, which usually comes in writing in as many different ways as possible, then the better and better you're going to get at this. So I think the big things is don't be afraid to get creative. Don't be afraid to have fun with it, because as AJ said, in some of these cases, nobody has to see this.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, Micah. And Sarah has a great, I just want to talk on that really quickly. This will sound cheesy, but I see decks. I see corporate decks all the time. And what does everyone think about them? They're boring. They're not engaging. And here's my too long didn't read point. I think writing poetry can help you be a better business writer. Like, I think that if you want your clients to remember your ideas, you need to make them sticky. So Sarah has a great question. I'm sure Micah, do you or anyone know you deal with writing how to deal with writing at work that burns you up? That's a great question.
This is a really interesting one to me, because as a marketer, I do a lot of writing at work, but as a creative writer, I also do a lot of writing on creative projects, things like that. And one of the things that I've found is that it's almost two different modes to me. So when I'm writing for work, I'm doing this from a very fact-based, like diving into facts and figures and voice of customer data and things like that. So I'm restricting myself a lot. In a lot of my creative work, it's just anything goes. I'm going to go for it. So I find that almost if I bounce between the two, it actually keeps me fresher than if I just go really hard at doing nothing but marketing writing and don't do any creative writing. Like if I have a week at work that it's been really, really intense, and let's say I get off of work and I go, gosh, I just don't feel like doing any of my creative writing. After about a week, I'll start feeling pent up personally and going, you know, oh my gosh, I need to get back on my creative writing. So I try to kind of schedule it to where at least bare minimum on the weekends, I do have some time to do some creative writing work, because I find that if I get stuck in either doing nothing but marketing writing or doing nothing but creative writing, let's say, you know, I've had a couple of weeks off at Thanksgiving or Christmas, something like that, and I've just focused on creative writing, then it does tend to burn me out a little bit. But if I bounce between the two, it keeps me a little fresher. But that being said, everybody's different.
Yeah, I love that idea though. I actually feel that way about reading. So I sometimes feel, so as an academic, I'm just constantly reading, you know, academic articles, and I sometimes feel sort of malnourished, like I'm going to get sort of an intellectual scurvy. And so I need to read something literature based or something like creative or poetic in order to get that vitamin C. But yeah, Sremi, you agree? That's cool.
Yeah, and I think the writing is the same way. I think, you know, a lot of times the creative writing is a lot of our vitamin C for those of us that do the creative writing, because oftentimes there's very few of us that are lucky to be able to do that for our day job as well. So yeah.
Ooh, Jacinta MBILO, I may be getting your name wrong. Advise on maintaining prose in an entire report. So we actually, I think we only have like 3 minutes. You're more than welcome. I'm going to put my email address in here. I'm happy to chat with you offline about that question, because I kind of have some more follow-up questions by what you mean by prose, and maybe you're meaning like something consistent. But anyways, if you wanted to chat, I'm happy to chat offline about that. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, this was really wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I think you're muted, Micah.
Yeah, there we go. I believe that wraps us up for the afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. Great, great session today. Hope you guys got a lot out of it, and great to see everybody's thoughts on their USP and their why. So, all right, everyone, have a great rest of your week.